Alright, hi everybody. Today we're going to be talking about dissemination of research. So the topic today, we're going to talk really briefly about some type of research designs, and then once you have this data collected, what do you do with it, who are you going to present it to, and how do you present it. That'll be the first part of the lecture, and then the second part we're going to talk about the specifics of your written paper that's part of your requirements for the summer. Okay, in terms of research, there's a few different types of research designs, and some of this is just information. You may have had this in another class. And what we're doing this summer in terms of health education typically falls into a type of intervention, but some may have components of some of these other research designs. So experimental design, so if you hear in the news about a clinical trial, if people are trying out a drug to see what's its effect in terms of type 2 diabetes, cancer, typically when research design you have people that you're able to assign to groups, and typically that's randomly assigned. So in here in the class, if I would take and give everybody a number 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, all of the number ones would be in the experimental group, so they would receive the experimental drug, and all the number 2s would be put into the control group, so they could be given a placebo, for example. And then you would see after a course of time, is the experimental group taking the experimental drug doing better than the control group? If the drug is going to see to be helpful, then we expect the experimental group to do better than the control group. You can also see this in terms of sometimes therapy. You want to give the control group some type of equivalent. So if you're doing some type of specific therapy for the experimental group, you might assign the control group to just talk to somebody but not receive that same type of therapy. One of the classifications for experimental design is you're able to manipulate the groups. You're able to assign people to different groups, and so it's usually much more of a rigid experiment that you're doing. Quasi-experimental design is where you're still trying to do control groups versus experimental groups, but you can't assign people in the same way. So if you're wanting to see the effectiveness of the drug on men versus women, you can't assign a person to be a man, you can't assign a person to be a woman, so that's why it's called experimental design, because you can't manipulate that aspect. Non-experimental design is kind of what we're doing this summer for some of you guys. If you're doing a pre and post test, there's no experiment, you are doing an intervention, there is an in-between variable, but you're using things like surveys, some of you guys might be doing counts, so maybe observations in terms of your evaluations and a result to see in terms of what type of impact you did. Interventions, your health education. If you're providing something specifically where there's a pre and post design where you can take a baseline, you provide them with information about nutrition, physical activity, depression, and then you test them afterwards to say, did they learn more about these aspects and how that relates to health? That would be the intervention that you're providing. And so most of you are doing some type of intervention because you're going out into the community hoping to affect change. So once you have your data, how do you let people know what your results were or what you did? And this determines first and foremost on who your audience is. Are you trying to share your results with the academic community, or are you trying to have people in the community know what you did? So if you're trying to present in the academic community, again, some of you may have already done this in your school path so far. You may have prepared a poster, so if you're involved in research in a lab, sometimes the work and the research that comes out of labs, they present at conferences. Typically for conferences, the academic presentation can take one of 3 formats. A poster, which is what you see here, where you're giving a synopsis of your results, typically in a visual manner. You'll see with the paper that there's a lot of overlap between your paper and your poster, but your poster is a way to represent the information in a visual way, almost as a conversation starter. A paper would be exactly what we're going to have you guys do, and I'll talk about the requirements for that. And then you would give an oral presentation of those results. A symposium is kind of like having 2 or 3 individual people present their paper orally, usually the 3 topics of the 3 individual people are somehow tied together in an overall topic. So it could be research on behavior modification, and then there would be 3 different papers of each person presenting their research, and so with slightly different topics. Another way that we present in the academic arena is through publications. Sometimes you have conferences, you go through that first, you get feedback from others in the field, and then you write up your results in a more formal setting, and you send that out to a journal. These are examples of an academic journal in some of the science fields, and it's gone through a process called peer review. And in the peer review process, we don't know who the author's name is. It's sent out to 2 or 3 people, and then they critique it. And usually you then get feedback from the editor. You go through probably a few revisions, and then ideally and hopefully they'll accept your journal article and it'll be published. That process usually takes quite a bit of time, though. In terms of the community, when you do research, whether it's hard and fast research or kind of like the things that we're doing here this summer in terms of health education and writing up small reports, if you're doing a written piece, it's usually done in the form of technical reports, and these reports can go back to maybe school officials if you worked with a school, definitely funders. So anytime a project gets funded, a funder wants to see how was their money spent, did the objectives that you said you were going to accomplish happen, and what were those results? And so that's in a form of a report, and it doesn't necessarily take the exact same format as the process for an academic paper or publication. So that's even another level in terms of community people. If you're just trying to talk to your neighbors, the people, get back in touch with the people that participated with you in health education, sometimes that can take the form of a newsletter or a pamphlet, again to reinforce maybe some of the concepts that you taught. And some of you will and have in the past in our community health projects distributed pamphlets, whether they're from the American Heart Association or pamphlets that you guys have created on your own. That's another way to disseminate the information that you're going to be talking about to the community. Okay. So the specifics of the requirement of the community health project report. Some of you have done in your classes research paper, you'll have the section of the introduction, the methods, the results, and the discussion. So the beginning of your paper should have an introduction section, and you can look at your handout in terms of the format with a little more detail of what should go into each of these sections. But your introduction should have, and also the formatting as well, like the header, is it formatted to center of the paper, that kind of thing, and that's all on your worksheet. You have to have an opening paragraph. So your opening paragraph should be a description of what you're going to discuss in the paper. So to say, this summer our group's topic was on skin cancer and heat exhaustion. In this paper we will talk about how we impacted the community and how we talked to high school students about their safety in the sun. We'll then go through and describe what the national statistics are for heat exhaust, and then also try to speak about the statistics to our area, and then in the end we'll give our reflection. So all of that would be the opening paragraph. So you would get into more detail of all those things that you just covered in that opening paragraph, but it lets the reader, lets us know where you're going to go with the paper. So that would be all one opening paragraph. The next parts of your introduction, and it'll be different lengths for different groups, is a discussion of the health issue your project was trying to address. So if you were ideally trying to address reducing the incidence of type 2 diabetes, so you provided a health education on nutrition or physical activity, your health issue is type 2 diabetes. And so you can provide and should provide, for example, national statistics on the rates of type 2 diabetes, maybe some rates in terms of obesity. You also then want, again, if you think about an inverted triangle being broad in the beginning and then getting more specific, so you start with the national statistics. I would then recommend you look at statistics for the state of California and report those for your health issue, and then if you can get even more specific, looking at the community, so looking at the Inland Empire, if that's, sometimes that have it only broken out by Inland Empire. Sometimes they have it broken out by county, and sometimes you can actually find the statistics for the city maybe that you serve. If, for example, you were focused on children, you could give the national statistics for type 2 diabetes in general, nationally for everybody, and then break that out by children, and again, give that for as far down into the community as you can get. You want to make sure you give some statistics on, are there differences by gender, are there differences by ethnicity for your health issue, and again, especially if you were focused on something like women's health, then you definitely want to make sure you have your statistics for all of that reported. So after a good discussion about what the health issue is, and at the very end, before you transition to your method, you want to say, why is this important to the community that you ended up serving? So you want to be able to make that case in the introduction. The next section then you transition to is your method. So your method is kind of your recipe book of what did you do, who did you do it with, and how did you do it. Somebody reading your method section should be able to then go out and replicate what you did. So the first subsection of the method section is participants. So in that section we want to know, who did you provide health education to? So you want to report things like how many people were there at your events, and this can differ based on how many people actually came to your event versus how many people did you receive surveys for. Sometimes that differs. Again, it depends on your project. What was the age group or the range? Sometimes you know specific ages because you have that from your evaluations that you conducted, your surveys. Other times you might just say it was middle schoolers, it was seniors, for example. Gender of your participants, again, sometimes you may have that information from your surveys. Other times you might be making estimates, and that's okay. You want to also talk about recruitment. So once you kind of describe who was it that you provided health education to and that took your surveys, how did you recruit these people? How did you get them to actually show up to hear your presentation? So what was your strategy in the beginning? What did you decide? How were we going to send out flyers? Were we going to work with our community health partner to put out the word that this event was going to happen? And how did your team work to ensure that you would actually have these people show up for your health education event? So you want to tell the story of how you got people to come to your event. Describing your health education, what health education you provided, you want to detail your project. So this is like the who, what, when, where. So we want to give, and it doesn't necessarily have to be in this order, but this information needs to be in detail in this section. So what did you do? Did you do a fair? Did you go to a health fair or do a tabling event? Did you provide a screening? Did you conduct a workshop? Where did this take place at? So you can say, we participated in the Riverside Health Fair, Senior Health Fair, and we provided a tabling event where we passed out information and talked to people about cognitive awareness in your later years. Did your project, how did your community partners help you to make the project possible? So you can say the project took place at the Boys and Girls Club. They provided the space and donated some of their equipment, and we provided a workshop on nutrition and physical activity for elementary school kids. Another example could be you worked with a community partner like Planned Parenthood, and they provided training to you before you went out and educated people in the community. So for all of the community partners that were involved, sometimes it's only one, it's at the place where the event actually takes place. Sometimes people have community partners that assist them in other ways. You want to make sure you give them credit here in this section. Again, then go back and talk about who were the people that attended your event. How did you incorporate your surveys? So did you do a pre and post? Was it a workshop? People came in and before they heard your presentation they took a survey. After hearing your presentation, for example, on depression, then they took another survey to see if they learned anything about the symptoms of depression and where they could turn to for assistance. And when you talk about the number of people that came to your event, you want to also talk about, were you satisfied with the turnout? And make sure also in this section you describe when you did it, did the event. If you did it on multiple days or you had to change days, also talk about that as well. The results section is your third section. And the first part is the evaluation results. So how do we know your project had impact? All of you guys will have done some type of survey and given that out, and you will have entered your data, worked with me in order to, some of you guys will run your own analyses, and some of you will work with me, and I'll give you back a printout. This is where you report all this back. So some of it will be, our participants learned the symptoms of diabetes. Some of our participants learned the risk factors for for diabetes as well. So it'll depend on what your survey looks like in terms of what you put in this section, but you're trying to show, did you have impact from those surveys? And some of this will be writing, and some of this you can create graphs for or figures in order to show the results from your surveys, and then these also can be used then, the figures anyways, for your poster. This is where the paper and the poster kind of go hand in hand. You also want to give, and this is just a subsection of the results, your group's own evaluation. So this is, you're talking as a group together, and what does your group think was the potential impact that your project had on the community and this health issue. So that would be something separate. That's your subjective opinion after you provide your quantitative and qualitative results for the most part. Okay, the discussion section. So in the discussion section, you'll have your header discussion, and then at least 1 page minimum of, we want you to draw some type of conclusions. So as a group, you guys have talked about this, you've given your reflection, kind of tie it and wrap it all up for us. Say, you know, we went out in the community, our goal was to do this, to provide education about depression. We feel that by providing a workshop on the resources in the community, that we had an impact, and we know from our results that people did come away learning more about where they could go to receive services and what symptoms of depression were. So that's an example of how you want to wrap it all up. That doesn't have to be any more than a page, but that's kind of a group conclusion. After that 1 page, every person in the group is responsible for submitting a 1 page that is included in this section. So each group member must include a reflection on their project. So if there's 5 of you in the group, there should be 5 additional pages, because every single person is writing this 1 page reflection. If people want to write more than a page, that's great. It should be a minimum of 1 page, ideally more than a paragraph. Okay? So really try to reflect on the project. We want to know, so you want to make sure you, at the minimum, you address these 3 questions, but again, you can provide more reflections than this if you like. What did you learn by doing this project? So we have all of these steps involved for the community health project. You each will have a different role based on your project and your team. What did you learn by doing this? And this can be by actually going out in the community, it can be from the lectures, any part of it. Tell me everything that you learned this summer because of the community health project. Second, the first one is more knowledge, like what knowledge did I gain? The second is, what did you feel in doing the project? So we're looking kind of like emotions, affect here, that you thought this was harder than you thought, and why was it hard, or what aspect of it was hard. You thought it was interesting, why was it interesting? It had an impact on you personally, why did it do that? It changed your impressions about the health topic, why did it do that? So all of these, we want to be able to answer that question of why. And then the last thing is, what I'd like you to predict, like if you were to do this again, if you were given the opportunity to educate the public again, what project or topic would you do? Maybe you didn't come up with this topic, you were interested in it, but the way that it played out wasn't, necessarily completely 100% your idea. If you were given the opportunity to completely design a project in next summer, for example, what would you do? What topic or project health issue would you do? Who would you like to do with, and what would it look like? Again, brief, but kind kind of predict what you would be interested in doing. Okay? And any other reflections? Sometimes students talk about what they got out of working as a team. Sometimes they talk about leadership, what they got out of it. Sometimes students have powerful reflections about the conversations they've had with the community. All of that can be included and should be included in this reflection page. And that's it. If you have any questions, again, you have the handout, email myself or Alejandro at any point. Usually students don't have a lot more questions until they get to the point of writing it, and that's understandable and that's okay. And the way that people work out how they're going to write it, sometimes a couple people take the whole entire paper as their requirement, sometimes they take sections of it, and there's leaders that put the pieces together. However your team works it out, that's okay. And if you need any help, if I have any questions along the way, please feel free to email us and check in.